Good morning and welcome to the crazy catastrophe show. And I'm just kidding. I'm going to try this every morning until my cats are no longer crazy, and I hope you will bear it with me. So I woke up this morning and I wasn't sure what video I wanted to make. And as I do, I have a brain that needs to know what's going on without reading a lot of details. And I skimmed through a bunch of different websites, and I happened to come across an article that was posted today when I had just posted last night on TikTok. And the article is called Hold Please. 6 Signs You've Had an Eggshell Parent. Now, the Huffington Post just posted this, and I've had several over the years media outlets reach out to me because I am the person that started using this term. And honestly, it came from a book called Stop Caretaking, the Borderline or Narcissist, and it's really about understanding what it's like to walk on eggshells with parents. And so also recently, the Business Insider did a really great interview. They actually reached out to me and did the interview. So if you want to learn more, please check those out. It's just a great moment because I feel like my whole brand is hypervigilance, eggshell parents, really, traumatic childhoods and adult relationships and attachment, and autism. But really, eggshell is what has driven me to honestly be a psychologist, to be in this field, and talking about my parents at 50, making my first content really ever, was about me finding the courage just to not be so alone in something that I initially felt confused about and a lot of shame about, and didn't really fully understand. So today's video, I just want to share with you in case you're new. And if not, this is one of my newest courses, the Hypervigilant Trauma Personality. It's really about developing hypervigilance as a result of walking on eggshells. And so here is the checklist on what makes an eggshell person or parent. So if this is you or you were raised by someone like this is important to understand. And then we'll quickly talk about the signs of this behavior and the symptoms in you, because this is why it matters. You don't need to buy my course, but if you understand that, like working on trauma, on having a nervous system that lives in fight or flight, that you often live in survival mode, that you find yourself scanning people for their moods. When you have a parent or partner whose mood determines the temperature of your home, it creates chronic hypervigilance. And chronic hypervigilance, as I talk about even here, has so many parts that it affects in your life, right? If you're always scanning for any signs of someone to be unhappy or be giving you the silent treatment or change their mood, it alters often who you are. And the thing is, we don't just outgrow it in childhood. It often becomes what I say is, hi, baby. Bear just crawled on my lap. The lens with which we see the world. So these are the signs and symptoms. I'm going to put it up on the screen. I'm talking fast because I have a client at 9 and I really want to get this video made. Okay, so eggshell relationship checklist. Yelled, screamed, and or raged often. Was emotionally unpredictable, sometimes had sudden mood shifts. Generally did not hold or model healthy boundaries. Seemed to want me to be a best friend, therapist, or parent to the parent. Could be supportive, helpful, loving, or not at all. This is my big thing, is that these are not parents who are usually quote unquote bad all of the time. And that is why I spent so many years, 50 of them, frankly, confused. Acted childish, immature emotionally, so not really good emotional regulation or emotional intelligence or maturity. These are emotionally immature parents. These kind of parents with narcissism, parents who really struggle to manage their big feelings. This parent is highly sensitive to rejection, seemed easily triggered into rage, anger, extreme emotions, seemed to struggle a lot in relationships, name called, mocked, joked, or minimized my feelings. Never really understood the impact of their mood on others. Feel like I walk on eggshells around them. Could be impulsive. I never knew what to expect. Never accepted real responsibility for their behavior. Often blamed others or me. Felt like I received good love and bad love. That's what I was just talking about. Often feeling confused. Confusion is a very common state for children in these kind of environments. They gave me the silent treatment. They stonewalled me. and express their negative emotions non-verbally. So even if they weren't yelling and screaming at you, if you were afraid of them icing you out, you're still walking on eggshells. And then you needed this relationship, you need to read this relationship to determine safety and expectations, meaning that scanning becomes who you are. Emotional monitoring can be, is a term now we use, often part of hypervigilance. And then let's talk about what it does to you, because this is where I really got going. Really quickly, this is also part of the course. It breaks down the exact patterns, the 5 areas where we see eggshell behavior, and then the consequences. And that's what I want to share with you today. So I grouped all of the symptoms into really often trauma responses, because that is how we often organize and kind of create an internal map, just like attachment, about what to expect. And as a quick aside, at the core, you might see disorganized attachment patterns in these parents, because the source of safety was also the source of fear. And also we can see some anxious attachment patterns as well. So in terms of what we might find ourselves living in a state of sort of low key to high key panic or fight or flight. So we see chronic nervous system dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, mood reading, checking behaviors like I talk about. A great way to watch this in the extreme is, I think it's the first season, the 6th episode of The Bear at the Christmas dinner. This is where Jamie Lee Curtis is just phenomenal. But if you watch Sugar and really all of the children's faces, how much the entire episode is loading us up to keep our eyes on Donna when Donna blows, we are in the hypervigilance with the characters. That is what it feels like in the extreme, but just like everything else, there can be, mild to moderate flavors of that. So negativity bias. We know that when we grow up looking to scan for safety, we're looking for negative behaviors, and we can become biased for that. So even in some research that shows that in neutral faces that don't necessarily portray anger, we're more likely to see anger or upset. Anger issues, tiptoeing around their emotions, overthinking and overfeeling and overanalyzing everything and everyone. Is this safe? Is it not? What do I do? What do I not? So at the heart, we can see social anxiety and anxiety in general. That's obviously going to coincide with a state of hypervigilance. Okay, the second one is guilt and shame. These trauma responses in us, when a parent is like this, often breed a sense of there's something wrong with me, or mom or dad or parent wouldn't be like this. And these parents might actively say, like, you make me like this. You're the one triggering mommy, things like that. So we can have a lot of toxic shame, the classic Pete Walker CPTSD shame, a relational distrust, a lot of self-blame and self-abandonment, and a lot of those combo trauma responses like fawn freeze, fawn flight, fawn fight, where we're pleasing and pushing back, pleasing and avoiding, all of those things. The next area is silence or freeze, and this is where we often avoid conflict, because if you had an eggshell parent or caregiver, anger was often a dangerous emotion. And so, no thank you, we are not doing that. So you actually end up, what I talk about, and I'm actually writing a book about hypervigilance right now, is you essentially avoid anything that feels like conflict, and often end up not even advocating for yourself. The idea of even raising your hand and having a boundary, if that could make someone upset, no, thank you. Not going to do that. So we can see self-silencing, identity issues, depression, and grief. And that can kind of coincide with that freeze response. We can also see a collapse isolation. This is kind of that level below freeze, where we're literally almost playing dead, or our body's gone into shock to prepare us for the fatality about to happen when we think about the animal world. So emotional avoidance, dissociation, chronic fatigue and exhaustion, and chronic illness. And lastly, pleasing or fawning behaviors, that please and appease, where because we're rotating around you, not only do we detect and scan, but in these childhoods, we often feel like or are made to be the person responsible for helping the parent deal with their big feelings, complain about their ex, be, the confidant as a child. You're 12 and mommy is discussing her sex life or dad with you, or their dating life if they're divorced, right? And this is even, I think, a bigger risk in divorce for some reasons that are not our fault as divorced parents, and some that are. And so we can see compulsive caretaking. This is one of the most common parts of attachment wounds with those who have experienced parents who displayed a disorganized and or anxious attachment style. This is because not only are we rotating around you, but the parents' big emotions, their feelings, their problems, their hopes, beliefs spill over again and again and again and sort of loom large in the child's world. And the child feels and becomes responsible. This is where we see enmeshment, parentification, boundary violations, and parents often oversharing to connect, which we can often do, as I've talked about. And then if you have a brain that likes to go deep really quickly, you might too quickly sometimes use that oversharing or trauma dumping in some way to bond. And with the right people, it's probably going to go pretty well. But oftentimes I think we can misread those situations. And just as I've shared, in the early years of my divorce, because I had pretty much full custody of 4 children ages 1 to 9, and the situation was not a normal situation. It was quite extreme. And kind of out of nowhere, 10 plus years into my marriage, I felt so much shame that I would just tell random people, like at the furniture place, like, oh my God, blah, blah. Like now I'm horrified that I did that. But I think I felt so much, I was trying to always explain it. Like my whole life, I didn't want to be divorced. All I wanted was a family and a quote unquote normal life. So to find myself there at 40 with all of this going on and that not even be a more classic divorce story, which I know is a whole loaded thing to say, but the point is it really triggered all of these pieces. And so I didn't know how to advocate for myself. I avoided conflict in my marriage. I avoided it with my mom. I would, as I grew, push back more and more. And so all of these responses, dysregulation, dissociation, chronic fatigue, and illness, don't forget at the core, if you grew up in an eggshell dynamic, what we're talking about is your brain and body being soaked in the chemicals of toxic stress. So the chances that you might have those ACEs or you have chronic illness, inflammation, high cortisol levels, and how all of that can manifest, accidents, injuries, everything that you can imagine, these are going to apply because these kind of parents or caregivers who aren't good at being aware of themselves and how they impact others often make impulsive decisions, unhealthy decisions, overshare, right? So you're absorbed in the stress with them. And I have never believed more now that I am so deep in research. Right now, I'm talking in my book on the body burnout of these kind of environments and hypervigilance, that chronic stress and early childhood trauma are massive for the story of our mental and physical lives across our entire lifespans. So anyway, as I said, this is my whole brand, and I saw the article. I was like so excited to see the eggshell parent term. I've posted about it. I mean, those videos on TikTok have millions and millions and millions of views, and they're just me standing in the kitchen with some type talking about what it feels like. Remothering, this is also why I made this course, and this course on really being raised by parents who really are off an eggshell, those who struggle with undiagnosed borderline and narcissism particularly, and then it could also include certainly things like undiagnosed bipolar, ADHD, autism, if we're talking about things like anger. But the part where you get the good and the bad love tends to occur primarily, I would say, with both borderline and narcissism and how those can overlap. And really what is essentially emotional immaturity, regardless of what it is. So as always, I never want to, say all this just to demonize, but the more and more I read and talk about things, in fact, as I said recently, a lovely author just sent me a copy of his new book, and it's talking about, which we're going to talk about. I'm going to ask him to hopefully come here, no contact, and really the demonization and not talking about what I say, which is I fully believe there's so much more harm going on in people's homes from a mental, physical, and emotional harm than we ever believe. And that this idea that blood is thicker than water has enabled abuse for decades, forever, really. So anyway, that's it. I hope you'll check out those articles online as well if you're curious. And honestly, things like trauma therapies, podcasts, books. I'll list some more books in my comment section or the notes section. DBT, inner child work, boundary work, attachment wound work. Everyone asks, how do I fix this? And it's not so simple. It's not just about nervous system regulation, which is important. That's a big buzzword right now, but it's also about how you approach every relationship in your life including the one you have with yourself, how you talk to yourself, how you think about your life, and how you really deal with people. So it's not just getting yourself calm, which is important, or regulated. It really affects, because I believe that hypervigilance in a chronic form often becomes our identity. And that is why I am so passionate about this topic. So anyway, thanks for being here. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.